I could sing that for an hour. And what's so funny about that is we've been working our way through Eitan Katz's album Live in Jerusalem, just going down the song list and using it as the music during the little countdown timer at the top of the show. So, and there's a lot of songs on this album. That's just the one that happened to fall out today. But not 15 minutes ago, I was humming that melody. It just came into my mind. We were singing it during Simchas Torah, led by Moshe Storch in Armenian. And I mean, there's no accidents. It was just so beautiful that it fell out that way for me. I love that nigun. And Ki Karov Elecha, that's Moses talking in the Torah saying, this matter is very near to you. Right? This matter is very near to you. You don't have to, cross an ocean to fulfill your obligations in the Torah. You don't have to climb up to some peak or go up to heaven to bring it back. The ability to fulfill our obligations is very near to us in our mouths and in our hands to do it, right? To say the right thing, to speak the right words, particularly with kindness to the people in our lives. And to do what we're meant to do, what we're obligated to do by the Torah. This matter is very near to you. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get together to do some beautiful learning on a Thursday evening? Yehuda in South Carolina, Stephen in New Hampshire, Nancy in North Carolina, Paul in Chicago, Belle in Texas, Bill in Missouri, Carla in Georgia, Rebecca in LA, Lucy in Minnesota, Christo in Lubbock, Renee in Indiana, PK in Colorado, Tom, Shalom Havarim. I had a minor surgical procedure this morning, same day surgery. I've been home since 2 p.m. It went well. I'm fine, minimal pain. May we only hear good news, Tom. May you have a refuah shlema, a complete healing of body, mind, spirit. And we say amen. Paul in the great Northwest. Bella says shalom. Paula loves that music too. Christo likes the shirt. Hey, Yid, that's what we call ourselves. Yid is Jew in Yiddish. And you can find it in our store, shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Everyone wishing each other a refuah shlema. Sarah in California. Sal shaved. I was wondering if somebody was going to notice. Yes, I was enjoying having that long white goatee that I could kind of pull on and, stroke my beard as I'm considering subjects of wisdom. But in the end, I've just never been one. Like, the beard really itches on my cheeks. It didn't itch so much on my chin, but I'm also not that old that I should have a snow white beard. So what the heck? Really, I just got tired of it. And when I get tired of it, it's out. Okay, Chaim in Charlotte. I love everybody wishing Tom a complete recovery. Beautiful, beautiful. We are a community. Over there on the YouTube side, Neil in Virginia, Marjorie in Georgia, Aoife in Florida, Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. Right. Where are we holding? We're opening a new chapter today here in Tractate Beitzah, the 8th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of festivals. We open chapter 4, but the theme that we've been exploring is continuing. Right, the sages are erecting this fence around the Torah, right? The basic law that we don't do malacha, we don't do constructive labor, neither on Shabbos nor on festivals. And then we have this big exception that on festivals we can do the work of preparing food. And so we can kindle fire so that we can make food, and we can slaughter an animal so that we can roast it and eat it. But, it only goes, that exception only goes so far, and things that we could have and should have done before the festival began are not going to be permitted. And then the sages all through chapter 3 were defining that gray area. How far does that permit to do activities that would otherwise be prohibited constructive labors, but they're related to food preparation and necessary to do on the festival, so that we can rejoice in the festival. Now there's going to be some matters which, okay, they're going to be permitted. They're definitely related to food preparation. But the sages are going to say it would be better if you have to do these activities that you make a shinui, that you do it in an altered manner than the way that we do it during the week. And we were seeing that at the end of chapter 3, that, well, you could obtain meat or spices or flour from your neighbor, the grocer. His store isn't open, but okay, you can go and obtain these things from him directly, but you can't do business with him. You certainly can't exchange money, and you can't even measure. You can't weigh the meat. You can't take a specific number of cups of flour. You just estimate according to what you need, because the act of measuring, whether weighing or displacing water to calculate its volume or even measuring with a ruler, that's too much like the work of the week. Now we're going to be talking, for example, about carrying objects through the public domain, definitely related to food preparation. So it's going to be permitted to carry the water or the food through the public domain, so that you have it to rejoice, to prepare the food and rejoice on the festival. But can you alter the manner in which you carry these jugs of wine or oil or water or the food, the meat, the flour, etc.? Can you alter the manner in which you carry it, so that you and the people who see you have a clear distinction between the manner in which you would do that on a non-festival day during the week, as opposed to now that it is a festival? We are going to be doing page 30 today, but we'll open at the bottom of the B side of page 29. A little adjustment there. Okay. And this is Mishna number 1 here in chapter 4. Right near the bottom of 29, and we'll get right over to page 30 momentarily. Mishnah number 1 of chapter 4. One who brings wine jugs from one place to another place may not bring a large number of them in a basket or in a tub in the usual weekday manner when it's a festival, as this is disrespectful of the festival. But he may bring 1 or 2 barrels on his shoulder or carry them in front of himself. Similarly, one who brings straw for kindling or for feeding animals may not place the tub behind him while carrying it, as this is the usual weekday manner, but he may transport it in front of him, in his hand, in an unusual fashion. And one may begin taking straw for kindling from the pile of straw, although he did not designate the pile for this purpose the day before. He had a pile of straw that was really just being used as animal feed. Then during the festival, he says, oh, you know what? I need to kindle a fire in my oven. I hadn't planned to use straw from my pile of animal feeding straw as kindling, but the Mishnah says, okay, you can do that. You can use that straw for kindling, but one may not begin to take from the wood in the wood storage pile, which is a small yard behind the house, where people store various items that they do not intend to use in the near future. So we're getting back to this concept of muktzah. Right? So did you have in mind before the festival began that these items, which are not ordinarily used on the festival, that you might in fact use them? If you did not have that in mind, if there was no reason that generally people might have in mind to use these things, then they become set aside and you can't use them on the festival. If you didn't designate them for use on the festival, if there's no reason to think of them that they're commonly regarded as designated for use on the festival, if ordinarily it would not be used on the festival, and then you happen to have a need for them, you might not be able to use it because it's considered muktzah. And as we'll see, Rabbi Yehuda holds by muktzah, We hold by muktzah. The halacha came out to be that we hold by this concept of muktzah, set aside items not prepared for use on Shabbos or festival can't be used. But Rabbi Shimon did not hold by the concept of muktzah. He said that was a rabbinic ordinance and he didn't believe in it. But he was the minority. He lost that debate. That was the Mishnah. Now we go to the Gemara. A Tana, that's a rabbi of the Mishnah, taught in a Beitzah. A Beitzah is contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but not quite as authoritative as the Mishnah. If it is impossible to modify the manner in which one carries a vessel, whether due to the vessel or due to the time constraints, it is permitted to act in the typical weekday manner. So here we learn right away that this idea of try to do it in a manner different from the way you would do it on a weekday, it's permitted to do it. And if you can't alter the manner that you would do it on the weekday, you can do it in that same manner on the festival, but it's better if you can alter it. So this is one of those cases where, it's permitted to do it, but it would be better. It's like the rabbis are asking us to be a little bit more machmir with ourselves, to be a little bit more stringent with ourselves, to push ourselves a little bit to, really, what can I say, to glory in the festival, right? If you want to, because you want to be constantly thinking about the needs of the festival, all of last week we were in Sukkot, and which is the season of our rejoicing. And you want to be in that mood of rejoicing all week, and especially on the full-fledged festival days. And so, we're not really rejoicing so much when we're working, right? Okay, now we're working in order to bring the food or the wine or the oil or whatever we need for the festival. Okay, so there's a good reason to bring it so that we can have a beautiful festive meal later. But even while we're bringing it, let's not slip into our regular weekday working consciousness. Let's remain in that elevated, rejoicing spiritual consciousness. And the Gemara relates that Rava, the sage Rava, or the Amora Rava, instituted the following in his city, Mechoza, which is in Bavel, in the Babylonian Jewish community. One who usually carries his burden with difficulty on a weekday should modify his habit on a festival and carry it on a pitchfork. I'm reminded, Nina sends me to the supermarket to do an errand for her, buy some things she needs, especially last minute, right before the festival starts. There's a few things we need. Off I go to the supermarket. I was told, whatever, like to get a package of festive paper plates and, 1 can of tomato sauce. What do? I walk into the supermarket. I don't bring a bag. I don't bring a sack. I don't pick up a basket. I certainly don't wheel a cart. I just go find the plates and the can of tomato sauce. Now, while I'm doing that, I get a call. Oh, and we also need, we need some bottles of water, and we need some lemonade. And pretty soon, I'm walking around the supermarket with all this stuff under my arms. I think only men could be so stupid as to enter the supermarket without carrying a bag or a basket. What can we say? We're dumb that way. So here it's saying if during the week you're kind of that idiot who doesn't use some kind of a carrier, something to make it easier to carry your burden, you carry with difficulty. Okay, so now on the festival, don't carry that way. Use some kind of an implement like a pitchfork to help you carry it, or a pole or a bag or something like that. Do it differently than you would do it during the week. Even though here, the difference actually makes it easier for you. Good. So enjoy that it's easier for you, but the main point is to make it different than how you would do it during the week. And one who usually carries it on a pitchfork should carry it on a carrying pole held by 2 people on their shoulders. One who normally carries it on a carrying pole held by 2 people on their shoulders should carry it on a carrying pole in his hands, although he is not thereby making it easier for himself. He didn't make it easier, but he made it different. One who carries burdens on a carrying pole in his hands should spread a scarf over it. And if it is not possible to make these modifications due to time constraints, it is permitted to proceed in the usual manner, as the master said above. If it is impossible to modify, it is permitted. Rav Hanan bar Rava said to Rav Ashi, the sages said, as much as it is possible to modify the weekday manner, one should modify on a festival. A question was asked of Rav Ashi, but don't those women fill their jugs with water on a festival without modifying, and we say nothing to them by way of protest? Why do we not instruct them to alter their usual manner? Why don't we take a moment here and, give God our thanks that we live in the 21st century, where when we need water in our house, just walk over to the kitchen and turn the tap, and here comes water. We might even be so lucky as to have filtered water. Nice, beautiful, not only drinkable, but good tasting water. Just one little, key turn away right in our kitchen. Because there were times, and there still are, even today in many places in the world, where when people need drinking water in their home, somebody needs to take a big jug on their shoulder, walk, down a big hill, a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, and then schlep all that water, and water is heavy as heck, back on their shoulder or on their head or some other manner, so that there could be drinking water in the home. So let's just be thankful we live in such a time when we don't, and in such a place we don't have to do that. Okay, so he said to them, but it is not possible. So he's pointing out that there are these women who on the festival are going to bring back the water in the same way that they would during the week. It's hard enough to do the work of carrying water in these jugs. They don't have different jugs or a different manner of carrying on the festival as on the week. And as we've already said, it's better to make the change, but if you can't make the change, you don't have to. So now they're just looking at a specific example of this. That Rav Hanan bar Rava says, these women are not changing. Should we say something to them to encourage them to change, to find some way to carry the water differently? And Rav Ashi said to him, it is because it is not possible for them to fill their jugs any other way. What do you want them to do? How should they act? She who is accustomed to filling a large jug, should she instead fill a small jug? Won't this mean that she increases her walking because she has to make more trips to get the water that she needs? And she will thereby come to perform unnecessary labor on the festival by making more trips? Or if we're to suggest the opposite, that one who fills a small jug, she should fill a large jug, well, won't this mean that she increases her load? Furthermore, if one were to suggest that she should cover the jug with a wooden cover, well, sometimes that cover falls off, and she might come to bring it in her hand in the manner of a burden, which would actually be prohibited. And should she tie the cover to the jug, well, the rope might occasionally break, and she might come to tie it, and then she makes a permanent knot on the festival, another prohibited labor. Finally, should she spread a scarf over it? Well, it occasionally falls off and it becomes soaked in water, and she might come to transgress the prohibition against wringing out the scarf that became wet. Therefore, it is not possible to make a modification, and those women may act in the regular manner. Don't be such a smarty pants that you want to extend this idea that we want to change things from the way we do it on the festival, from the way we do it on the regular week, now that we're doing it on a festival. In this case, the women are working hard enough. The job is difficult enough. There's no practical way to give them an altered manner of carrying the water on the festival. So keep your mouth shut. Leave the women alone to do what they're doing. Rava bar Rav Hanan said to Abaye, we learned in a Mishna that the rabbis decreed that one may not clap, nor strike a hand on his thigh, nor dance on a festival, lest he come to repair musical instruments. Before we go any further, of course we are clapping during festivals, we are striking our thighs, and we are dancing. Coming out of Simchas Torah, wow. How could the Gemara say that those things are prohibited? This is actually not the subject of the ruling that's being brought now, and why it's relevant to leaving those women alone and letting them carry water on the festival just as they do during the festival. But now that this teaching is being brought in, it's kind of a two-part teaching, and the first part is being taught so that we can get to the second part. But the law didn't come out that way. However, we don't use musical instruments in synagogue on Shabbos or on festival. Now, I know that in some non-Orthodox synagogues they do, but that is not the normative halacha, and the reason, not the normative law, and the reason is that you might come to repair the instrument. You might come to tie a string and make a permanent knot that extends beyond the festival. There's a whole bunch of problems with this, and that's why musical instruments are prohibited under Jewish law. But clapping, striking the thigh, and dancing, at one time, they said, well, they shouldn't even do that because that will lead them to include musical instruments. And once they're using musical instruments, it might lead them to make a repair of a musical instrument on the festival, and that would be a transgression. But the law got worked out a different way. We actually studied that in Tractate Shabbos. But to continue, so that's what it was introduced. So that was prohibited. Okay, one time it was prohibited. But nowadays, we see that women do so, that they clap and strike their thighs and dance on the festival, and yet we do not say anything to them, just like we don't say anything to them about altering the manner that they carry jugs of water on a festival. So he said to him, Abaye said to Rava bar Rav Chanan, and according to your reasoning, how do you explain that which Rava said? A person should not sit at the entrance to an alleyway next to the side post that has been placed at the edge of an alleyway in order for it to be considered a private domain, as perhaps an object will roll away from him and he will come to carry it 4 cubits in the public domain, thereby transgressing a biblical prohibition. But don't these women take their jugs and go and sit at the entrance to an alleyway, and we do not say anything to them? Rather, the accepted principle is, we'll get to that in 1 second, so this idea of we don't sit in an entranceway, so that's what we're talking about, where there's a community, it doesn't have an Eruv, but they made a joining of courtyards. So what happens is there's a public thoroughfare where you can't carry on Shabbos or on the festival either, for purposes other than involved with the needs of the festival or food preparation. But let's just talk about Shabbos. So you can't carry in that public domain, but that alleyway that abuts the public domain, you can carry in that alleyway because the courtyards that open into that alleyway made a joining of courtyards and Erevin Hatzeros. And so that they could carry from one courtyard to another. They could carry objects even on Shabbos from one home to another, from one home in one of the courtyards to a home in one of the other courtyards through that alleyway. But in order to be able to do that, they had to make a conspicuous marker at the opening to the alleyway. And what they're saying is, well, you shouldn't sit right there at that opening, like at the very edge of where you can carry, because you might drop something and it rolls out into the public domain, and then you say, oh, whoops, I dropped my thing, and then you reach out and get it and bring it back into what is now the private domain, and now you have violated Shabbos. So protect you from doing that, they said you shouldn't sit right at the edge of the private domain where carrying is permitted through adjoining courtyards, the edge of that right to the public domain, where you can neither carry more than 4 cubits in the public domain nor transfer objects from the private domain to the public domain, or vice versa. But now he's saying that, well, so we have that rule, that's an established rule, and yet we see that there are women who are sitting right at that edge with their jugs of wine, and the jug could fall and roll out into the public domain. And yet we don't rebuke them. We don't say to them, hey, you shouldn't sit there with your jug of water. Why is it that we don't say anything to those women? Rather, the accepted principle is leave the Jews alone. That's how it's put here in the Torah and Talmud. What does that mean? It is better that they be unwitting sinners and not be intentional sinners. If people engage in a certain behavior that cannot be corrected, it is better not to reprove them, as they are likely to continue regardless of the reproof, and then they will be sinning intentionally. It is therefore preferable for them to be unaware that they are violating a prohibition and remain merely unwitting sinners. And here too, with regard to clapping and dancing, leave the Jews alone. It is better that they be unwitting sinners and not be intentional sinners. Now, how far does this go? When does this apply? Is this to say that, we're never going to rebuke people because then, they might not listen to the rebuke, and then they're going to go from being unwitting sinners into intentional sinners, and so therefore we never rebuke? Of course not. It is actually a commandment to rebuke a sinner. However, we don't rebuke a scoffer, right? Now, what is a scoffer? It's not necessarily this case. A scoffer is somebody who just goes a little bit further and they scoff at law and Jewish practice, etc. Here is somebody who's just got, established habits, and we have strong reason to believe that even if we told them how they should conduct themselves, they wouldn't listen to us. There's some kind of real reason, not just a thought in my head, but like they've been doing this for a long time. We've heard other people have told them, whatever, and they're still doing it. When does that apply? Does it apply only to rabbinic ordinances, like don't sit in that alleyway? What about Torah laws? And the sages will end up making a distinction. There are some laws that even though they're not explicitly stated in the Torah, it is considered that they are by Torah law, like the 39 malachos, the 39 categories of labor that you can't do on Shabbos. There's not a list in the Torah that says, these are the labors thou shalt not perform on Shabbos. The sages derive that since when we were creating the tabernacle in the desert, that came a repetition of the instruction to honor Shabbos and to stop all labor, and that had already been stated in the Ten Commandments, and now it was repeated while the Jews had started to engage in building the tabernacle. It must be that all the kinds of labor that necessary to build the tabernacle are the kinds of constructive labor which we can't do on Shabbos. And so violating Shabbos by doing one of those labors is considered a violation of a Torah law, d'oraisa, right? That you violated a Torah law, not just a rabbinic ordinance, and therefore you become liable to bring a sin offering when the temple is standing. Those kinds of laws also fall under this idea that if people are going to do it anyway, no matter what you say to them, then you don't bother to rebuke them. So better they should be unintentional sinners than intentional sinners. However, laws that are stated explicitly in the Torah, like don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, so therefore don't eat meat with milk. Okay, that's explicit in the Torah. You see a Jew doing that, yes, you tell them, hey, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. You're doing it for their benefit so that they shouldn't come to violate the law. You're not doing it for your benefit or because you're being judgy. You're doing it for their benefit. But it's not going to benefit them if they're not going to learn from it. But that only applies to Torah laws that are not explicitly stated or rabbinic ordinances. Torah laws that are explicitly stated, even if they're not going to listen to you, we do tell them that they should do it differently. And the Gemara comments, there are those who understood that this principle applies only to rabbinic prohibitions, but not to Torah prohibitions, with regard to which the transgressors must be reprimanded. However, that is not so. It is no different whether the prohibition is by Torah law or whether it is by rabbinic law. We do not say anything to them. That's what this Gemara says, but as I mentioned, where the law came out, is if it's stated explicitly in the Torah, we do say it to them, even if they won't listen to us. But the Gemara continues, for example, on the eve of Yom Kippur, meaning the afternoon before Yom Kippur begins, there is an obligation that one begin the fast of Yom Kippur while it is still day, right? So that full period of evening, right, between where the sun dips below the horizon and when it actually becomes dark, that whole period we need to be fasting, even though it's uncertain whether Yom Kippur has begun. You need to finish your last eating on Yom Kippur while the sun is still visible in the sky, or at least the sun is still above the horizon if you could see it. right? So for example, on the eve of Yom Kippur, there's an obligation that one begin the fast while it is still day, before sunset, as the extension of Yom Kippur. During this time, one must observe all the laws. This mitzvah of extending Yom Kippur is by Torah law, right? Since you're going to count all of the evening before Yom Kippur starts, and then at the end, when does the fast end? When the sun is about to dip below the horizon, dip into the horizon? No, when it's fully nightfall. That's why the Yom Kippur fast, it's not 24 hours, it's like 25 hours, even a little more when we count in the prayers that we have to do before we hear the shofar. But that's the way we fulfill Yom Kippur. So the mitzvah of extending Yom Kippur is by Torah law. And yet, people eat and drink until darkness, right? So this is just the way of the world, at least when they were teaching these laws 2,000 years ago, that there were people who just weren't going to listen to this. They're like, I got a big fast coming up. I want to get my last bites in while there's even just a glimmer of light in the sky, even though the sun is well down below the horizon. And so they say here, but we do not say anything to them, as we know they will pay no attention. It is taught in the Mishna, and one may begin taking straw from the pile of straw, and we're back to the Mishna now, and Rav Kahana said, that is to say that one may begin removing items from a storeroom on a festival, ab initio, although the items in this storeroom are designated for other purposes, and you probably didn't have it in mind that you would need these items from the storeroom on the festival. They were out of sight, out of mind, and then you realize, oh wait, I do need this thing on the festival. Can you use it? We're back to that question of muktzah. Was it set aside from use during the festival? And since it's in your storeroom, it is not assumed that one put them out of his mind and therefore they're set aside. But if so, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who is not of the opinion that there is a prohibition of set aside, of muktzah. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold by muktzah. According to him, on Shabbos and festivals, it is not prohibited to handle items that one has removed from his mind. According to Rabbi Shimon, there's no problem. It's on your property. You can use it. Rabbi Yehuda would say, unless you had in mind that these are the items that I'm going to need during the festival, you're not going to be able to use them. There's a little bit of an exception to that if it's items that you might not have thought particularly about that item, but they're commonly used on the festival, then you're still going to be allowed to use it because they're commonly designated for use. Now the Gemara challenges, so say the latter clause of the same Mishnah as follows, but not the wood in the wood storage. If so, we have come to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who is of the opinion that there is a prohibition of muktzah, right? Our Mishnah that we're talking about, the first Mishnah of chapter 4, said, so you can use straw from the straw pile, that you can use it for kindling. Normally that straw is for animal feed, but you're going to be able to use it for kindling, even though you didn't have that purpose in mind. But wood from the deep storage that you might want to use it in your oven to fire the oven, they're saying you can't use that. Unless you had that wood in mind that you would use it during the festival, it's muktzah and you can't use it during the festival. So it seems like, well, the law about straw from the straw pile is in accordance with Rabbi Shimon, who doesn't hold by muktzah. But this law about you can't use wood from the deep storage wood pile sounds like it's like by Rabbi Yehuda, who does hold by muktzah. So do the rabbis who set these laws of the Mishnah, do they hold by Rabbi Shimon that there's no muktzah, or like Rabbi Yehuda that there is muktzah? That's the contradiction that the Gemara is examining. And the Gemara answers, here we are dealing with wood of cedars and firs, which are expensive and used only in the construction of important buildings, not for kindling. And the wood storage is therefore considered muktzah due to the potential monetary loss. Like if you're a contractor, or you're a carpenter, and you have a wood pile at your house of fine wood that's only used for building, okay, you did not have in mind that you would use pieces of that wood in your fireplace or in your oven in times of a wood-burning oven. So that wood, that's more expensive wood, beams and boards used in construction, that is muktzah. That's not available to use during the festival as firewood. And even Rabbi Shimon concedes that it may not be handled due to the prohibition of muktzah. About this idea of the storeroom, what is the law? Although it is permitted to take items from a storeroom of produce or a storeroom of wine, because those items are so typically needed on the festival, even though you didn't think particularly you were going to take wine or oil from your storeroom during this festival, it's prepared for use because it's typically used. But one may not remove items from it for the first time on Shabbos or a festival unless it is for the purpose of the mitzvah. In other words, for the sake, for example, for the sake of the mitzvah. What is the sake of the mitzvah? For the sake of distinguished guests or to clear a space for studying Torah. Right? If you've taken wood or oil or wine from that storeroom before, okay, it might be in the back of your mind that you might need some on this festival. But if it's a locked storeroom that was loaded once and you never took anything out of it, you're not going to start taking out of it on a Shabbos or a festival. One should not empty out the entire storeroom, lest he level holes in the floor of the cleared space, leveling the floor of a dirt floor. That's sort of like filling in holes. That's a prohibited labor. And if one began to remove objects the day before, he may remove them all on Shabbos, even if it is not for the purpose of a mitzvah, because he started removing the day before, so he designated that this stuff would be for use on Shabbos or the festival. To go back about this law, well, I mentioned it already. I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. On the B side of page 30, we're just going to open the discussion of Mishna number 2, and then I'm going to tell you where the law came out. Mishna number 2 of chapter 4. One may not take wood from a sukkah on any festival, not only on the festival of Sukkot, because this is considered dismantling, but one may take from near it, right? So obviously you're not going to be able to take wood from your sukkah to use to fire up your oven. Why? Because the sukkah is something that you consecrated for the use of fulfilling the mitzvah of sukkah during Sukkot. Right? That's now a consecrated item for the length of Sukkot. And you certainly can't take wood out of it for any other need than the mitzvah of sukkah. What about if you built a sukkah during Sukkot, you left it standing there, and then the next festival that comes along is what? In the springtime, it's Passover. And now, during the week of Passover, on the intermediate days, that's a festival also, and you want to create a festive meal, and you don't have wood. Can you take wood from the sukkah that you built for Sukkot now, 6 months later, in the middle of Passover? Answer, no. Not because it's consecrated. That ended. Once Sukkot ended, the consecration of that wood ended. But to take wood out of your sukkah, meaning to dismantle the sukkah and take wood from its walls or from its beams that hold up the schach or from the roofing itself, what are you doing? You're dismantling that sukkah. Dismantling, we've said, wait a minute, what are the prohibited labors on Shabbos and festivals? Constructive labors. Is dismantling a constructive labor? Yes, it is. Because anyone knows that they've done home improvements, right? Often, before you can add a new room, you have to demo the back wall or demo the roof or demo a part of your house or demo walls, meaning demolish. So often part of construction is first demolishing something so that you can build in its place. Dismantling the sukkah would therefore be a prohibited labor on some other festival, even if we weren't dealing with the question of the consecration of the sukkah itself. What is the law? One may not take wood. It is prohibited to remove wood from the walls or roof of any temporary hut on a festival, and all the more from a permanent structure. However, one may take wood that is positioned near, but not attached to the walls of the sukkah. If, for example, when you built your sukkah, you brought a bunch of wood and you ended up having leftover pieces that were not incorporated into the sukkah, you might think that the stuff that wasn't incorporated into the sukkah, you brought it for the purpose of sukkah. Perhaps that wood became consecrated. Now you can't use it as firewood. The sages are telling us, no, you can use it. You can't take something that's directly built into the sukkah, but wood that is nearby, even if you brought it to that location, thinking that you might need it for your sukkah, it remains available to be used as firewood during the holiday. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel. The Rima holds that one may also use bundles of reeds that have been temporarily placed on the roof, as stated by Rav Menashe. Right, so again, you might have brought reeds to be used as the schach, the roofing of your sukkah, and you had more than you needed. And so, you threw it up there on the roof. Now, when you threw it up there, it has to be clear to you that you're just storing it up there. Not a really good idea. You shouldn't be storing reeds up there, but maybe you had no choice. And you didn't incorporate it into the roofing of your sukkah, in which case, of course, it would acquire that consecrated status and you can't use it. But if you already had in mind that it was extraneous, and if I need it during the festival, or I just don't need it, I'm just throwing it up there for storage, that you could use as kindling during the festival. It is prohibited to make use of the wood from the roof or walls of a festival sukkah, and this law applies throughout the entire festival of Sukkot, including Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day of assembly, and Simchas Torah, which we just came out of yesterday. And the wood takes on the status of muktzah at twilight on the eve of the beginning of the festival. Even if the sukkah collapses, it may not be used. You might think, well, wait a minute. Okay, I can't dismantle the sukkah, but what if the sukkah dismantled itself? A big wind came and the sukkah collapsed. Now, if I took wood from it, I wouldn't be dismantling a structure, so I should be able to use that wood, right? No, because of this problem, all the wood and the roofing of that sukkah was consecrated for the purpose of the mitzvah of sukkah, so you're not going to be able to use it as firewood. But a sukkah that collapsed and you left it there, and 6 months later it's Passover, okay, now you could grab wood from that pile of stuff that was the sukkah that just collapsed. That you could do because it's no longer Sukkot, so that its consecration has lapsed, and you're not dismantling a structure. And that's it. Okay, let's go to your questions and comments. Hold on a second. Here we go. Lucy. Maybe one could sing when carrying. That makes it different and even joyful. I don't see why not. I like that, right? So in that situation where you don't have an alternative method of carrying something through the public domain on a festival, there is no better way to carry it, no different way to carry it that will work in this situation. You could make it different by singing as you go. What a beautiful image, that normally this work is just work and we grunt our way through it. But now that it's during the festival, for the needs of the festival, we're going to do it with an enhanced measure of joy by adding singing to the practice. I like the idea. Stephen, it didn't dawn on the sages to have the men fill and carry the water jugs on a festival, since this would be in an unusual manner. They didn't mention it. I guess the idea was that the men were engaged in Torah study in the study hall, and the women were preparing the festive meal for when they got home, and so they could have the meal. They were fetching the water. I mean, unfortunately, you see that still today in some of these cultures where they have to literally go fetch the water by hand. It is usually women who are doing the fetching, and the men are doing other stuff. At least, from the sort of anthropological videos that I've seen. Way of the world. But I think that a more enlightened view would absolutely be, let the men step in and haul the water, of course. Steve Ribic, leave the Jews alone. Is this Levites referring to those from the tribe of Judah who may not be as well versed in the law as the priests from Levi? Right, so the Levites aren't all priests, but it's a subset of the Levites, the Kohanim. I guess there's a little bit of that, but it's not really that the Levites and the Kohanim especially are more well-versed in the law. The Kohanim, yes, they are definitely more well-versed in the law because they serve in the temple and there's so many laws with regard to bringing offerings in the temple that they need to know. The Levites know a little bit more than the average Jew because, yes, they sometimes get the opportunity to serve in the temple, and they weren't property owners, and they were receiving tithes because they weren't landowners from the rest of the nation, and I'm sure they knew those laws quite well. But really what we're talking about is simply people who are Torah literate and those who weren't, right? So the ones who knew the law versus the ones who didn't. And the sages themselves, occasionally one of them is a Cohen or a Levite, but most of them are not. They're Yisrael just like all the other Yisraelites. And so really they're just talking about the difference between one who knows and one who doesn't. And if the ones who don't are going to sort of wallow in their habits and not make a change, even if you tell it to them, better you shouldn't tell it to them. But you have to have a strong reason for thinking that if you inform them that they wouldn't listen to you. It's particular cases. We're not going to learn out big general principles about that. It's always a tricky thing. Always a tricky thing, right? If we talk to our friends in the Kirov business, right? People who work for Chabad or for Aish, our friend Mendel Schwartz, who's now running the Chai Center, took over from his father, Schwartzy. And there's a saying in that community that sometimes, you gain a from Yid, you gain an observant Jew and lose the family. And what do they mean by that? That, you had a family that, was not very observant. And then one, a young person, maybe in his 20s, sort of gets the fire lit and wants to become an Orthodox Jew and follow all these laws. And because they're young, right, they kind of go home and start lecturing their parents. You should do this, you should do that, you should do this, you should do that. For me, you need to do this, for me, you need to do that. And they become stringent, but they kind of don't have the communication skills and the diplomacy that they might have when they're older. And then the family gets very turned off to religious Judaism because I think it's just a bunch of finger wagging do's and don'ts, and they're not, the kid is not communicating that inner spiritual stuff that is what he's getting, and why this tradition has prospered and remained so vibrant for thousands of years. So you really have to be careful when you're telling people what the law is and how, if they want to conduct themselves so that they're within the letter of the law, what changes they would need to make. It's not an easy conversation, and it really takes a tremendous amount of diplomacy to do it right. A lot of wisdom involved. Steve Ribich, I just read the text. The original uses the collective Le Yisrael, not Jew, tribe, or Judah. So I'm assuming that on days of festivities, in doubt, let the good times roll. It's not the time for giving lectures on the law, right? I think we're on the same page. And Tom, didn't the Torah use the word malachos in both instances with regard to biblical and rabbinic prohibitions? Well, malachos are really specifically those 39 categories of labor. But I think what you're saying is, for each of those categories, now the sages will make their rabbinic ordinances around it, right? So they consider carrying through the public domain to be a malacha. But, creating an Eruv, not sitting in the doorway, fixing a courtyard by putting that crossbeam across its top, those are all rabbinic ordinances. And, if you violate them, do they just kind of use the general word that you're performing a prohibited malacha? It might be, but generally that word malacha, labor, the constructive labor, the 39 categories of it itself is referring to those categories of labor necessary to build the Mishkan, and then they certainly built rabbinic ordinances around that to protect us from coming to violate those prohibitions. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, tomorrow, we just come out of the holiday. Today's Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday. We're already thinking about Shabbos. So it'll be the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Have a terrific evening.